Well, good evening. I'm Dorothea DiCecco, and you're watching Wake Up America. Welcome tonight. I have three guests that have come from New Haven. I was told about these individuals and how dedicated they are, and as you can see from the poster behind me, the emphasis of their efforts is in this area, and I think this is something that we all need to know a lot more about. And we're going to have presented to us this evening from all three all kinds of subjects relating to peace. These are the basis of life on this planet. Everyone has to have an interest in this, but I think that, and myself included, we don't get enough information, and it's very difficult on the so-called news that comes to us either in newspapers or magazines, and especially television. We don't realize what's really going on in the world, and I think that you're going to find you'll be very well educated after we're through here today, and maybe some of you might be interested in hearing more of what they have to say. First of all, the organization is the New Haven Peace Council, and these people here have been part of this group for many years, and I'm going to let them talk about it. And I think the best way for me to do this is to introduce each one and then let them carry the ball for the show. First of all, Henry Lohendorf. Welcome, Henry. Henry.
Thank you.
And next to Henry is Mary Compton, and Mary and Henry are co-chairs of this New Haven, Greater New Haven Peace Council. Thirdly, Jim Pandaro. Welcome to you also, Jim. Jim will tell us his interest in this as well. Jim has not only this in mind, but specifically as a veteran. He will give us all kinds of ideas and thoughts and new information that I hope many of you will find shocking and extremely interesting as well. Well, enough of that. So let's start with Henry and let you open the show, Henry.
Thank you, Dorothy. It's wonderful to be here. Let me say something about the Greater New Haven Peace Council briefly so that we orient the audience. We're an organization that has existed since the late 1970s. The Peace Council grew out of an organization that existed even before that called the New Haven Coalition for Peace and Justice that was active during the war in Vietnam. So it was active for about 15 years. And we're part of the U.S. Peace Council, which has chapters around the country, and the U.S. Peace Council is part of the World Peace Council. The World Peace Council was created in 1949, in the late 40s, and its first action was to collect petition signatures calling for destruction and disarmament of nuclear weapons. So it started out after the Second World War and the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan to call for the disarmament of nuclear weapons, and really hundreds of millions of signatures were gathered in that. The World Peace Council is now headquartered in Athens, Greece. So we have our own local peace council, and we are active on many fronts, and our slogan basically is peace and justice. So we see that peace and justice are intertwined. You cannot get justice without peace or peace without justice. So that's a little background for the Peace Council.
Thank you. Mary, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, we have we have meetings twice a month, the second and fourth Tuesday at 6 o'clock at 37 House Street in New Haven, and we invite the community to these meetings and discuss current issues and current actions that we could take. Jim is part of a weekly vigil on Friday in front of City Hall, where he distributes flyers that are relative to current events, and people, you have found, Jim, that people are very responsive and
yes, they are
very interested in the material.
Now you have ties to other countries as well, organizations. I mean, this is not just a local New Haven. I mean, I know Henry mentioned some of that, but you receive information and are part of events that go on in other parts of the world as well, do you not? Not that you travel there all the time, but I'm saying you're kept aware.
Yeah, there are conferences that we do attend. Henry, you've been to a conference recently that maybe you would like to talk about?
Well, I think that you raise an interesting point. The peace movement is not limited to the United States, certainly. And in November, I was in Vietnam at a World Peace Council Executive Committee. We're the U.S. Peace Council's part of the leadership of the World Peace Council. As the major military power in the world and as the most belligerent country in the world, the United States gets some kind of recognition in the sense that the rest of the world wants to know that there is a peace movement in the United States. Actually, I still find it surprising that there are people from countries around the world, India or Argentina or South Africa or Asian countries like Nepal, who are surprised that there's an active peace council in the United States, given what the United States is doing with its military. So we do meet with people from around the world and discuss what is happening here and what's happening in their countries, exchange views, and come together with a common understanding of what the most serious issues are, what the cause of those issues, concerns are, and how we might deal with them. That all takes place in international conferences. Let me just add one thing about the Peace Council. We just had a conference in Baltimore, Maryland in January that the Peace Council helped to initiate, and it had to do with U.S. foreign bases. And Mary went to that conference, and perhaps she could say something more about that.
Sure. That was the Coalition Against U.S. Foreign Military Bases. There were about 13 peace and justice organizations in the United States that organized this three-day event. And it was very successful in the sense that over 200 activists were present and had to agree to sign a unity statement, which enabled us to reach out to a broader group. And that's an issue that we're working on now, trying to reach more people and work together with many different groups. So the Coalition Against the U.S. Foreign Military Bases, its focus was on how many bases the United States has. We have over 700 to 800 foreign military bases throughout the world in about 80 countries. We have a military presence in over 150 countries. And as Henry and Jim will talk about later, 60% of our budget goes towards the military. And that was the focus of it, and recognizing that human needs in this process of militarization are not being met. You know, people are not getting the services that they need in their communities, healthcare, in schools, housing, food insecurity, which we'll talk about later. And the 13 organizations, I don't know if I should mention them or, yes?
Sure.
The 13 organizations that participated with us were the Alliance for Global Justice, the Black Alliance for Peace, Code Pink, Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, International Action Center, the Martin Luther King Justice Coalition, Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, Popular Resistance, United National Anti-War Coalition, the U.S. Peace Council, Veterans for Peace, and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, along with World Beyond War. And
it's interesting that these organizations exist. They're very serious, and, you know, intelligent people that are very dedicated, and yet we don't know. I mean, the average person doesn't get this information.
Right.
And I mean, you're a veteran.
I am.
And you have. Tell us about your experience as a veteran and your input into the importance of the existence of this type of dialogue today.
Thank you. Well, I believe that all the topics that we're going to touch on are all interconnected. And in the very best tradition of Martin Luther King Jr., when he connected poverty, racism, endless wars, and a lack of health care, lack of education, violence at home, sexism, and the whole gamut, he connected the dots, and this is what we're trying to keep alive in the best tradition of Dr. King. So, as a veteran, I had 4 years active in the Navy. I was a cryptographer from 1962 to 1966. And then I went back in again in the reserves, but this time I went into the construction battalion, the Seabees, and I was in for 20 years. I like that part of the Navy because we build and we didn't destroy and blow up things. So we were builders, and we did a lot of goodwill projects within the area and elsewhere. And but like many young people in my day, when we were growing up, we always thought that we were the best thing going, and we would bring freedom and democracy to the whole world. And war films were very much a part of our lives. And there came a time when I joined the service, along with many hundreds of thousands of other of my fellow citizens, and we thought we were doing the right thing. But later on in life, we found out we were sold a bill of goods, and that there are wars and conflicts that some of them, most of them, it turned out to be, we're originating. And it's bringing so much misery, and death, and destruction. Not even talking about the lack of services that we could be providing for every citizen in this country, like medical care and free education. We're the only nation in the history of the world. We're the richest and most powerful nation in the history of the world, and we can't provide health care for all our citizens. And it's just a shame that so many people are here and abroad are still suffering the consequences of our adventurism and wars. And we need to wean ourselves away from a war economy and start beating our swords into plowshares and start using all that energy and human energy and lives for the good of uplifting everybody, not only in this country but around the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, as far back as I can remember learning about history from grammar school and all the way through, it's always been the wars that they've stressed, you know, the war, this
Exactly.
war, and that war, you know, from way back in thousands of years ago. That was the way conflicts were settled. But when you look at it now from your vantage point, you can see that it isn't the people that fought that had a say in it. You were just told that this was great. You're defending, like here,
Freedom.
Democracy, and that word, in the flag, they put them together with freedom and music and all bands playing and so forth. And and I think that's what they taught us. And I never heard of people as a child or even through college and all, and even now, of groups such as yours, which I'm sure have existed through time as well. There are always going to be people that are trying to do something, but if you don't have the money and the resources to get your message out, those in charge, those that are profiting, obviously will use their money selling weapons and to control media and ideas that get out to the public. And it's quite a challenge that you all have, and it's just, to me, it's very inspiring to think, you know, that you mention, well, you happen to mention Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes.
And it seems that finally, as he went through, he began to look at people working, right? These sanitation workers, they needed money to live. I mean, this was the important thing, and he went there to help them get something. And then he tied that to spending money for war. And you know, that made him very controversial, and people were turning against him. But when you look at that, look at war as a way to solve problems. It doesn't solve any of my problems or the average person's problems. It just solves the problems of who's getting money from all the weaponry and so forth, and the minerals and all the things they take from these countries that they go to. And we're all led to believe that we're fighting for the flag, but we're fighting for these people that they couldn't do it alone without the war.
We're fighting for the 1% on Wall Street.
We are.
And the bankers.
Of course. It
And
is.
the munitions makers.
Of course. And they existed in a different form in the past through history, but they've always been there. But there can be a time when this isn't going to be, hopefully, you know, we have hope that it's not going to, and that's why it's important to get your word out to people, and that's why I'm very happy to have you all here. But so this budget, we'd like to talk about the how much money, my taxes, right? We all work. We have worked. And every month or week, whatever, some money goes somewhere, and we just accept it. And you know, how many of us ask, how much is going? What does it have? What are you doing with? Are you building a bridge or a road or a hospital? But where is it mostly going? What would you like to start?
Yeah, let me say something about that, if I may.
Yes.
You're gonna hold this
Oh,
up
yes,
and,
I'll hold
and
this.
see if people can see that, and I'll point to it. I just want to bring in, to me, some of the hopeful things that are happening right now because they relate to this military budget. Yeah, it's, just that's fine,
Is
and
that
I'll
all
get
right?
to that. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Just the teachers' strikes that started in Tennessee and then moved to Kentucky and Oklahoma and Arizona and Colorado. The teachers are striking because the education budgets of those states has been drastically cut, and they were already low. The teachers were poorly paid, but even beyond that, the budgets were drastically cut. They've been cut in Connecticut, the richest or one of the richest states in this richest country the world has ever known. They're being cut, and the teachers have said, and they worked very hard to make it clear that they weren't just asking for increases in salaries. They're dealing with books that are 20 or 30 years out of date. They're dealing with a lack of resources. They're dealing with crumbling schools. All of these things, education is being sacrificed. And so what we see is, where is the money going that it's not going to education? So that's what this chart is about, and I'll point out some of the things in the chart. First of all, this is the discretionary budget. This is what Trump votes on or signs, and the Congress votes on every year. Every year it has to vote, here's how much we spend and where we spend it. The red bar here is war spending. That's the Pentagon's budget. This year it's $700 billion. It's $80 billion more than it was last year, and Congress voted for that $80 billion increase, including 2 senators and 5 Congress members from Connecticut. They voted for that. Trump only asked for 54, but he got 80, and our Congress members supported that. So war takes $700 billion, and then all of the other things that the government spends money on is left with the rest. So the largest fraction that's left in terms of what we call human needs is veterans benefits. And education and housing and healthcare and science and transportation, all of these other things, each of them gets less than, say, $80 billion. So the $700 billion that goes to the military, goes to the Pentagon, is 60%. 60% of our tax money goes into the Pentagon. And that's what the chart shows, and that's what's going on, and why the teachers have to go out and strike, and why many kids are not getting an education, because that doesn't count as far as the people who make the decisions are concerned.
Now, you said Congress voted for this. Someone proposed it. I mean, this extra amount that they didn't even ask for this year, right? The military did not ask for this raise that under the Trump administration.
Well, I'm sure the military works with the Trump administration and works with Congress, but it was more than the Pentagon actually asked for. So they got $80 billion more than they had last year, and Trump only asked for 54, so the Congress even increased it. And that is the biggest military budget of any country in the world by far. We have this other chart just as a comparison.
Oh, yes, yes.
Just as a comparison. There are many more countries than are indicated on that chart. But this chart shows the U.S. military budget. You're fine, right there.
Okay.
This chart shows the military budget compared to the rest of the world, the larger military budget. So the United States is here with close to $700 billion. This is from last year, so it's less. The next highest spending on military is China, with about 1/3 of what the United States is spending. And the next highest is Saudi Arabia, one of the U.S.'s major allies in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia has a few million people, but it has a lot of oil. And that oil makes it huge quantities of money. And the United States is very happy that Saudis buy weaponry from the United States to keep our armaments industries wealthy. Then we have Russia, and then we have the United Kingdom, and India and France and Japan. Of these countries, 4 are allies of the United States. So when it's all added up, about 3/4 of all the military expenditures in the world are made by the U.S. and its allies. 3/4 of all the military expenditures in the world. And the U.S. basically spends as much as the next 7 or 8 countries combined. So that's what that chart is intended to show.
But what I'd like to ask is, you say the military asks for this money, Congress okays it, says yes, but what about the arms manufacturers? Aren't they the ones that are really behind all of it?
Yes.
And the Congress will go along with it. They get money from these people for their campaigns. So, you know, we keep saying, well, the Pentagon asked for this, or the Pentagon's doing this, but we have to go above them, the people that really control all of this, right? I mean, they're the ones that are keeping this going and keeping all the wars going.
Sure, there's money to be made in making weapons.
So when they say you're fighting, you know, you're fighting for democracy, you're fighting for freedom, it doesn't mean anything, does it?
No.
I mean, it's wonderful to think you could do that, and up to a point at certain times it probably was true, but I'm just saying that all these wars, that we fought a war in Iraq and in Vietnam, and they're telling us for our freedom, but they made billions and billions, the manufacturers, so they're the ones that keep this idea going, right? I mean, this is what we can't forget that.
Yes, I agree. That's very true, and it's been going on for quite some time.
Yes,
it's not recent, right? I mean, it's a military-industrial complex that I think we live under, and making weapons provides jobs. It's looked at as a way of providing jobs, and we need to help people become aware that, for example, even in Connecticut, where you have Sikorsky and Lockheed Martin, where there's always the question of, you know, getting jobs and providing jobs. We don't have to provide military jobs. We can provide. Why couldn't we use the money for the Sikorsky and Lockheed and build solar farms, or, you know, build something that would make our infrastructure, make our communities healthier? Why do we have to pit, you know, the worker who's looking for a job with a military that, well, it provides a job for my family.
Well,
We're capable of creating work
sure.
without that, but they have such a stronghold on our way of life. You know, there aren't Connecticut. Many states are suffering with jobs and finding a way for people to make a living. Really, I mean, with globalization, it's changed the whole job structure for people, and we've never really addressed that issue in our country. We've just kind of said, well, you know, you have to leave it to small businesses. They'll have to create jobs. You'll have to come up with something in your communities, right? But that's a government that we live under should provide, you know, an umbrella, an infrastructure for us. And where we work should matter. We shouldn't have to create weapons that kill other people to provide for our family.
I mean, that's very well put. And when you look at what our needs are today, driving on our roads, I mean, Connecticut's
right.
roads, they're in very poor shape.
Yes.
I just look at every bridge I go under practically. They're rusting.
Yes.
And
there's no money.
Possible collapse.
Yes.
Schools, as you say, books.
Right. There's no money because it's all going to the military.
But think of all the jobs you said. I thought you said that very well. They could be created just to make life better for us, which
More
we have
human.
the money to do.
Right.
But as long as this relationship and control by the people that have the money and they're convincing everyone that these military jobs are great, and in Connecticut, they voted money recently, didn't they?
They're in the process.
Electric boat, or which one was it? And our Senator Blumenthal, I guess, was praising this as a wonderful thing.
Right.
I mean, you think he'd have the guts to say once, how about let's make a list of what we need here, and let's start, like you said, solar power, water power. I mean, you can use all this stuff, and
Wind power.
wind power.
Sure.
It would be wonderful. And
The United States is the only rich, developed country that does not have a high-speed train service.
oh, of course,
Right?
yes.
And those people who use the trains, we're happy to have the trains that we have, but they're running on old rails. Even with new cars, they run very slowly compared to Europe and Japan and China. China, which is a developing country, has very high-speed trains. Japan has bullet trains. France has bullet trains. The United States has nothing like that. Our transportation system is one of the systems, one of the pieces of infrastructure that the American Society of Civil Engineers says needs tremendous uplift and upgrade. It gives the ASCE, the civil engineers in this country, give the United States a D+ grade because there's so much infrastructure, water systems, sewage systems, transportation systems, our communication systems, our electric grid. All of these things are in poor condition and failing, or many of them are. And as you pointed out, bridges and dams, and it would take trillions of dollars to upgrade them. But in fact, what we've done since 2001 is we've spent already $4 to $5 to $6 trillion, and it will be up to $8 trillion by the middle of the century that we are spending on these wars, which will include interest that we have to pay on the borrowed money, since the government doesn't tax us anymore. It knows people don't like to pay higher taxes, so it doesn't tax us. It just borrows the money from people who have the money to lend the government, and we pay, and our children and our grandchildren will be paying for the next 25, 30 years, these trillions of dollars, which could have been used for those dams and bridges and water systems, for airports, all these things that the country needs. The infrastructure is crumbling. In New Haven, there are potholes, and the city tries to fill the potholes, but it can't keep up. The roads, I've driven in third world countries. The roads, many of the roads, the streets in New Haven are as bad as they are in third world countries. That's how bad it is. And the city doesn't have the money, and the state, obviously, the state of Connecticut is struggling. But we ask, where's the money going?
Yes, well, it's going here in this graph that you have the red.
Right.
And the thing is, do people know what this graph, this line that's higher than any other country, where is it going? What are they doing with it that's making us, quote, safer? What's happening? We've got super weapons, right? You know, submarines, nuclear submarines. They want to make them bigger and better. How many do you need? One of them could blow up enough of the world that would make it so polluted, it would be uninhabitable, right? And I guess Trump wants another 10 or something of those. Why?
One less stealth bomber, one less nuclear submarine, one less atomic bomb can fund free higher education for every young man and woman in this country. So our priorities are upside down, and we need to get a handle on it. And I just want to bring out one thing. Just look how insulated or that we become just by that three-letter word, war. At one time, when you saw headlines like in World War II or in the Civil War, I mean, it really hit you right between the eyes. But war is so commonplace now. In the American site, it's used so much that it's like eating or breathing, you know. And on TV, the commercials say, you have a war going on right in your own home to kill these terrible microbes. You need us in full armor to come in and kill all these bad bacteria that you have. Or there's the war on poverty. Or there's the war on, help me out here.
Drugs.
Drugs, the war on drugs. And it just keeps on going on and on and on. But we did change war in one of our cabinet departments. It used to be the Department of War, the War Department. But now we've sanitized that and said it's Department of Defense. But everything else, it's like war is so commonplace in our vocabulary and our psyche that it's like, geez, it's an everyday thing.
Well, they've even changed the name of a soldier, as we call them, to a warrior. You're all warriors now.
Right.
They're wounded warriors, or our warriors are coming home. And I'm offended by that word, but I'm not used to it yet. I hear it and I just feel, my goodness, when did this change? But you're right, the focus on war.
I also want to add that in order to pay for a lot of these weapons of mass destruction, and Henry stated before that they really don't want to raise taxes that would cause an alarm in many people who are already living paycheck to paycheck, but they would go about paying for this by starving wonderful programs that took us as a society almost 100 years to develop. They would gut Meals on Wheels. They would gut school lunch programs. They would gut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, which so many people in my age group depend on. And there's got to be a better way. And things might be booming at Electric Boat and Sikorsky when there's a war going on, or the threat of a war, or another Cold War. But once things die down like we've seen after every war, there's a huge recession. And all these people who think that they can have a job as long as there's a conflict going on, they're guaranteed a job, they don't understand that once things wind down, they're out. But if we went to other converting our war industry into peace industries that would uplift society as a whole, there's a job for generation to generation to generation. And we could be uplifting society and the world as a whole. So we need to get our priorities straight.
I just want to point out we haven't really talked about the number of wars where the U.S. is engaged in
Yes.
Good
and
point.
has started since 2001. So I'm just going to name some of them. First of all, Afghanistan. There weren't any Afghanis on the planes that hit the World Trade Center, the Pentagon. There weren't any. Most of the people, most of the terrorists on those planes came from Saudi Arabia, our very close ally. Nobody has gone after or bombed Saudi Arabia based on that. So there's Afghanistan, and then 2 years later, Iraq, and then we're engaged in a war. We destroyed Libya. We're engaged in a war in Syria, in Yemen with our Saudi allies, Somalia, Sudan. We're dropping with missiles. We're dropping drones on Pakistan. We have all of these wars all going on at the same time, and once they've started, they don't stop. So the United States doesn't know how to get out of a war, it knows how to get in. Let's just point out one other thing, that when the two leaders of South and North Korea published a statement, a peace statement together, the stock prices of the major military contractors took a dive. Peace is not in their interest. And so you mentioned that they're behind this. They have their own battalions, if not large companies, whatever, of lobbyists. And they send their executives back and forth to the Pentagon and work at the Pentagon. Generals go into admirals retire and go into these companies. And they do everything they can to ensure that they're taken care of. And war guarantees that they will continue to make profits. So we understand that. And we also understand that Connecticut claims that the war economy is good for Connecticut. But we have to remember that all those nuclear subs that are made in Groton, and the jet engines that are made by Pratt & Whitney, and the military helicopters, the jet engines that go into fighter bombers, and the military helicopters that are made at Sikorsky, those are not building up the state of Connecticut to repair the infrastructure or to provide education. Yes, they do provide jobs, but there are a number of studies that show you get more jobs, higher paying jobs, better benefits outside of the war economy. So rarely does Senator Blumenthal, if ever, in fact I've never heard him talk about, or any of our representatives talk about how alternative jobs would benefit the state compared to jobs building weaponry. And I want to say one final thing in terms of spending money. During his term in office, his 2 terms in office, President Obama gave 2 speeches, one in Prague and one in Berlin. And in both of these speeches, he said, we need to disarm, we need to get rid of nuclear weapons. We have to get rid of them. And the world cheered his statement. And then he decided we needed to spend $1.2 trillion on more nuclear weapons. So the speech went this way and the money went that way. And President Trump has said it's not enough. We need to increase that. So we're building nuclear weapons. The hypocrisy about building nuclear weapons and at the same time going around and threatening other countries, you shouldn't be building nuclear weapons, is pretty strict, pretty strong. This is what we face. We have statements that go one way and the reality that goes the other way.
I just wanted to answer the question that you raised earlier about why there are so many weapons being built. And I think that has a lot to do with our foreign policy, and that we really don't, peaceful negotiations and diplomacy is really centered around how how much military weapons are given to other countries. That's what our diplomacy is really about now. And I think that that's an important part that people really don't think about that much, that why we're building these weapons under the name of protectionism, or, you know, it doesn't make sense. And we need to build relationships with other countries. But that's the way that we need to go.
Good neighbor policy.
Yeah, well, this the talk about Syria and bombing Syria. Of course, Israel's always bombing. They just go in and bomb and leave, and we hear about it sometimes and not. You can imagine living there, having this happen to you, your family, or relatives, or just within your own country. What if somebody was just doing this here, and then you leave because it's unsafe and you can't live there?
Right.
So you pick up, I can't imagine taking your kids a bag of something and walking and walking, hoping to get on a ship or boat or something.
Sure.
You might die going to another country. But you do it or die, and this is happening more and more than ever. And the people left behind, young and old, but the young ones that have the energy still are so outraged. They have to be at these, and now it's drones. We're fighting by drones.
Right.
And we say, well, we just killed this guy living in this house, a terrorist, and families and all that. So what do these young people do? There's nothing left but to organize and start fighting this in any way they can. So they're the terrorists, the new people we're fighting. Well, the name of the new people, they've got something that people can identify with, but they're terrorists. They're called terrorists. What would you do? Well, I would do that here if it happened to me and my family. But these kids, it's like hopeless almost. But they have managed in some areas to hold on to some things, but it's just so sad and cruel.
Right.
But and we've done that to this whole area of the world, right? And now we won't let refugees come into our country. Well, we allow 11 refugees from Syria, and yet we're saying, oh, the Syrian government's bombing and killing its own people, and yet we only, Trump and them allowed 11 of them? I mean, the hypocrisy is
What Mary said about our foreign policy, one of the most obvious things, if you connect the dots about U.S. foreign policy, is that when a government somewhere is independent, shows independence from the United States, the United States tends to try to overthrow that government. So Libya was independent, we overthrew that government. Vietnam was independent, we started a war there. Serbia was independent, we bombed Serbia. We've tried to overthrow the Nicaraguan government in the 1980s because this country didn't like it, and we're starting that again. Trump has already said that we may invade Venezuela because its government doesn't comport with U.S. foreign policy. The government of Syria has been, both Obama and Trump have said, we need regime change. Well, how do you get regime change? You bomb, you invade, you hire mercenaries. That's what we've done. We had regime change in Iraq. It's desperate. Regime change in Afghanistan. It's desperate. And one country after another, the United States is not bringing democracy. I don't believe it ever intended to. It wanted to bring control. It wanted to bring access to resources. So what we see is a policy that goes from one president to the next. It's not like one party is responsible for it. It's part of the overall policy the United States brings. And if a country does, we're threatening North Korea. I mean, Trump threatened to annihilate 25 million people in North Korea. And he did it at the United Nations, which was created to stop wars. And he did it in violation of all the treaties the United States has signed, international treaties, to stop wars and prevent wars. U.S. is going to annihilate 25 million, but of course, if you pay attention, you know that it won't just be the 25 million in the north, it'll be the 50 million in the south as well. And who knows how many other countries will be involved. So these threats, fortunately, we see that the North Korean leaders and the South Korean leaders are saying, wait a minute, on the basis of what the President of the United States wants to do, we're going to let him annihilate our whole culture, our whole history, our people. And so they've come together to say, we have to stop this. We can live in peace. So far, I think that caught the president off guard, and so far he hasn't said no. He hasn't continued to threaten. But we'll see, because the people that advise him are people who have called for war. And I think actually it's up to us to demand that we allow the North and the South Koreans to come together, that the United States not get in the way. That, to me, would be what we as citizens of this country can do.
Again, if you can imagine North America here being invaded, and then finally, you know, opposing economic systems, but again, one of them supported by a major superpower like the South was. And you can't visit your family, you can't go back and imagine not seeing parents, children, or whatever for how many years has it been now? 40 something?
It's 60 years. It's over. It's almost 70 years now.
I can't believe it's that.
54.
Oh, but that alone, there must be just longing, and let's try to. These are our people, you know. Culturally, we're one country. Same like with Vietnam, you know, and they and that you can't just sit quietly and not just be seething with anger at the people I mean, you look at who's responsible. It didn't happen before we were invaded, like, as you say. And but this, like you say here, you know, we would see this, you know, no nukes, no war, peace, you know, peace, and this is still the most important subject, the most important topic, you know, in keeping the planet alive, and it's not just the humans that suffer. And you know, you think of the water, the pollution from these ships, and all the bombs in the water, and all the fish and the microbes and
the Pentagon is the biggest polluter, the biggest single polluter in the world. The Pentagon,
and it uses the most
fossil fuels of any entity.
I mean, it's just, but that's the stuff that kids need to start learning about in schools. But who's going to write the books that will be sold? Because again, they're controlled by the ones that are benefiting. But it can happen, though, right? We've got to have
the people
like
of this. I really believe the people of this country can turn it around. We can create the kind of country we want to see. The United States can be a leader, not in wars and weapons, but in saving the planet and providing healthy, good-paying jobs for its people. It can have a fine infrastructure, can have the best educational system. We should be competing on that level, not on threatening countries that don't support our foreign policy or support us in war. So we have it's just unbelievable that you have people who in this country don't have enough food. We make more than enough food to feed our people, and there are people who can't afford it.
Now, you brought this information in this poster, but obviously it's unable to be read. But would you like to just point out some of these facts?
This came actually from something that Jim did, and I'm wondering if he would like to comment on it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. There's such a gap between the rich and the poor, and we, like I said before, we live in one of the richest states. It's not the richest state in the country, and the United States is by far the most richest country in the history of the world since history books have been written. So for people to not have enough food on a daily and weekly basis is a crime to me.
In Connecticut.
In Connecticut, in New Haven,
In New Haven.
right in the midst of one of the finest universities in the world, Yale, which has an endowment fund of around 20 some odd billion dollars. So right in the midst of this very prestigious and very well-off university, there's abject poverty, homelessness. Part of our job, and I know part of your job too, and other organizations like ourselves, is not only to bring awareness through protesting and civil disobedience, but to educate the public. And one of the things that we're doing every Friday is having these vigils in front of City Hall, and on Sunday there's another vigil right on Broadway and Elm in New Haven. And we try to bring awareness and educate the public as to what is really going on right in our own city and country and the world. We're certainly not winning the hearts and minds of people when we blow up a wedding party of 80 people just to get at one supposed terrorist. All we're doing is ensuring an endless supplies of people who hate us. We learned this terrible lesson in Vietnam, but it seems like Gore Vidal said, we have become the United States of amnesia. We forget. Every generation seems to have to repeat the mistakes of the previous generations. And I, for one, am getting sick and tired of it. Our veterans are suffering terribly. Many of them are deployed 2, 3, 4, 5 times in war zones. Many of them are coming back after seeing all these atrocities, very disturbed, and I hate to say it, but 21 of my comrades on a daily basis, as we're speaking here today to your audience, 21 veterans are committing suicide every day. 21. That's 147 a week.
And
you do the math.
What's the geographic area that you're talking
All
about?
over the country.
In the U.S.?
All over the country. They've
Imagine
seen
that.
so much horror. And it's not only the horror that is affecting our own soldiers, young men and women, but the other people that we're bringing all these wars upon. We're inflicting so much misery on so many people. We need to change our the way we conduct foreign policy, and we need to develop a good neighbor policy. I think war should become obsolete, and it's up to us. And I think a lot of the young people get it. And I just want to say one last thing, is just that we've come a long way, but we still have a very long way to go. And there's no reason why there should be lack of education, lack of shelter, lack of food in the richest country in the world.
May I have that, please, for a minute?
Sure.
Would you mind if I read just some of these?
Please.
Because I think this was, thank you very much for that, Jim. But it says here, we're talking about New Haven, 22%, over 22% of city residents are food insecure.
Right.
They either don't have enough money to buy food every day or by the end of the month. Among Latino residents, 34%. And in lowest income neighborhoods, 50.1%, including people who work full time. Children and elderly are the most vulnerable. 1 in 4 public school 8th graders reported inadequate food. Never, who would believe this in America, in Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, where Yale is, right? We think about that, and the hospitals there and things. Most food insecure adults were not eating in New Haven on average from 10 to 14 days per month,
That's correct.
just so their children could have enough to eat. 10 to 14 days a month. Good, that's like 2 weeks. Congress, including all Connecticut's representatives and senators, voted to increase the military budget by $80 billion, above Trump's requested $54 billion. Of the Pentagon budget of $700 billion, $11.3 billion is Connecticut taxpayer money. And just ending here, the following could have been created in the last 5 years in Connecticut: 35,000 jobs at $15 an hour, 35,000 infrastructure jobs, 35,000 clean energy jobs, 30,000 elementary. I mean, this is incredible that we allowed this, and our senators voted to increase more military spending. Are they aware of this?
In the midst of all this,
I'd like to have them visit these people, or better still, get a job, hopefully for $15 an hour for a year. Do this. See how you're going to live and buy clothing, and then tell me that, oh, I'd rather have the money go to the military. Well,
we actually spoke to Congresswoman DeLauro about this. We challenged her for voting this increase in the military budget. And she said, we wanted to know, well, what was your reason for doing that? And she said, well, basically, we were able to get some social programs. So they lifted the cap on the Pentagon, and they lifted the cap on some of the social needs programs. But from our perspective, this is extortion.
yes.
And each time we increase the military budget, we also increase our aptitude, our ability, our interest, that is the society's interest, the military's interest in fighting a war, or expanding the wars, or not doing diplomacy, or using drones. So all of these things come together. They're not unrelated.
Well, so where do we go from here? What is your overall opinion and about the future?
Okay, well, I just want to bring up that what we're working on is a resolution in New Haven that was started about a year ago. That Henry and the Greater New Haven Peace Council and the New Haven Peace Commission brought before the Board of Aldermen a resolution to examine funding for the city of New Haven and what the city could do if it had enough funding for all of the programs. And that turned out to be very successful in that people in the departments got a chance to see where they would spend this money. And so now, Henry, we're working on another resolution with the Board of Aldermen in New Haven as well, to encourage a public hearing so that people will be able to discuss where the money for the military is going and how it affects the communities. And we're encouraging people from other towns and cities to do the same, and people are working on it. So this is something that your audience could participate
Yes.
in and become part of.
Well, it has to start, and it usually does start with a small group of people that are very dedicated and intelligent and motivated, and certainly your group is definitely highly placed in that category of people, and I admire all of you for doing this. And I'm told we're getting near the end of the show, but I thank you for coming, and I'd like to continue this again whenever you're available, and would like to come back because there's so much more to talk about.
sure is.
And looking at our history and the way our country developed, that's another point of information that we need to tell people about. But I do thank you for bringing all this information to us together.
Thank you.
Thank
The
you.
three of you
Yeah,
coming
thank you
all
very
at
much.
once. And I'm overwhelmed by this and very highly motivated. And I hope the audience enjoyed, if you can enjoy this. But yes, learned a lot from this tonight. And find out what you can about the group. It's been on the screen, the website and your names, and thank you very much for watching, and we will hopefully see everybody again. Not hopefully, we will see you all here again. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothea.